What's going on, guys? I've got another headphones comparison video for you guys today, and it's definitely a fun one because these are two really highly acclaimed, both open back headphones, generally used for a pro setting. The Sennheiser HD490 Pro literally has pro in the name, and the Sony MDR-MV1 was made for a professional type of use case as an open back alternative to Sony's other professional headphones like the 7506, that's quite a bit old now, and the new MDR-M1 that Sony came out with a couple years ago. These kind of came out at a similar time. I believe the MDR-MV1 came out in 2023, and I think the HD490 Pro did as well, or maybe it was 2024. But I thought it'd be cool to check these two out because they kind of do similar things, and as I'm gonna mention a couple times throughout this video, I think they're like really close to each other. They are very similar in a lot of ways, in my opinion. And if you want a too long didn't watch, I would basically recommend just buy the cheapest one at the cheapest price that you can find, because I feel like the sound signature is somewhat similar. They do have their differences, and I'm going to get into it, but they both sound really good. They're both incredibly comfortable, two of the most comfortable headphones I've ever tried, and that's actually why I'm even comparing them, because a lot of the other headphones that I've tried simply don't fit me, and these are two of the best fitting ones, although I find the HD490 Pro a little bit more comfortable than the Sony's. But on the other side, I find the Sony's sound just a little bit better than the HD490 Pro. So combining those two things, I think if you just look for the cheapest price for either of these, I think go for it, and I think you're going to be really happy with both of these, especially if you're going to be using them multimedia wise, listening to music and also playing games, watching movies. I think these are two of the best options there are, and they're currently priced very similarly at $330, I think, for the MDR-MV1s right now. They're on a bit of a sale. And the HD490 Pro, I think, is going for $340 right now. So you're basically just splitting hairs. And yeah, I just really like both of these. And I think a lot of people who are gonna try these are really gonna like them. Either one. So let's start getting into some of the differences between these two, and we can get it kicked off with build quality and comfort. The Sony uses a 3.5mm connection here, which is actually a twist and lock system. So you plug in the cable and then you just turn this. You twist it and it locks in place. And I do think the cable is quite good. It's not amazing, but I feel like the quality is pretty good. The one thing I hate about the Sony MDR-MV1's cable is that you need to use this adapter if you're going to be using it for basically a normal casual listening setting, because these really are made for pro use. The termination is a 6.35mm jack, and you do get the adapter in the box, but you don't get any other cable, so you practically have to use this adapter if you want to plug it into an amp, a dongle DAC. It is 3.5mm, by the way. It's not balanced. And like, this part is really heavy. The adapter is heavy. And if you're plugging this into a dongle DAC, like a mini dongle DAC, it's kind of just hanging like this. And I feel like it's putting unwanted, unnecessary pressure on this and on your dongle DAC. If you have it plugged into an amp, it's fine, but if it's just hanging like this, I'm not a huge fan of that, and I'm a little worried about the longevity of this piece if you're gonna be using the 3.5mm jack, which I think most people will. So I don't love that, but I do like the general quality of the cable itself, and it has pretty good behavior. It doesn't really tangle, intertwine with itself. The Sony cable is also quite long. I think it's like 9 feet, probably. The HD490 Pro cable is much shorter. I believe it's 6 feet, and you have this mini XLR connection, which is good, but I wish it was a little bit smoother. I feel like the Beyerdynamic DT900 Pro X and the 990 Pro X have a better XLR connection, because it's just not as smooth as I feel like it's supposed to be, but it does the job, and it's honestly not a big deal. And then you have a 3.5mm termination. So I prefer the cable on the HD490 Pro because it's just shorter and I don't have to deal with that 3.5mm adapter. As for the build quality of the headphones themselves, I feel like these are both well built. I don't know if I would necessarily say they feel premium. They feel slightly cheap just because they're lightweight. I think the Sony is coming in at 230 grams or possibly less than that. The HD490 Pro is around 260, I believe, 260 grams. So these are two of the lighter weight headphones that you could get in the price range. They're not quite Audio Technicas, but Audio Technicas have their own issues, such as extremely small ear pads. Speaking of the ear pads, this is where the Sennheiser really separates itself, in my opinion, from the Sony in terms of comfort. These producing pads, and honestly, even the fabric pads that I don't have with me right now, I just find them a lot more comfortable than the Sony ear pads, which are kind of like a micro suede material. The material itself is not the issue. Like, I do feel like they get slightly warmer than the HD490 Pro, surprisingly, given that this is velour, but I feel like the velour actually stays a little bit cooler than the Sony's, in my opinion. And the material isn't bad, and you can see the foam does have a little bit of resistance, so it's quite a decent ear pad. The problem is the shape of it. Like, it's too small. I feel like my ear is cramped inside of this ear pad. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. A lot of other people I've seen online feel the same way. It's not the height. You have plenty of height, and the depth is, it is what it is. It's fine. It's not that bad. You do feel your ear kind of touching the inside, but it doesn't really cause any pressure points or pain. But the more you wear it, your ear does kind of sink more in, just because the material is compressing like this over a long listening session. But my biggest issue is just that my ear feels cramped, and I do get a little bit of pain generally like behind my ear. And as a disclaimer, I do have large ears, so take that with a grain of salt, but other people have the same issue. And I just do not have that issue with the Sennheiser, where my ear is getting plenty of clearance. The only thing that might happen is my ear kind of rubbing up against this little R and L. That happens more with the fabric pad than the producing pads anyway. So because I like basically everything about the Sony's except for the ear pads, I went on Amazon and tried to find a couple of ear pad replacements. I got this one from this company, which I cannot pronounce. I have no idea what that is. I'll have these linked in the description below. This one's a velour ear pad, which is, it's not the same type of quality as the Sennheiser, but it's not bad. It feels pretty good, and it's much more comfortable, in my opinion, than the stock ear pad. And I also tried these hybrid ear pads from Brainwaves, which is kind of like a leather outer and inner, and it has some velour on the part that touches your skin. The problem with these two, I didn't like the Brainwaves at all. I felt like it changed the sound signature way too much, and they made the Sony's kind of feel like a closed back, because it was just giving me more isolation because of this leather. It was making everything sounded a little bit too bassy, too boomy, and I wasn't hearing my environment like I would with the stock pads, and that kind of defeats the purpose of the open back, because I do want to hear my environment. These velour pads don't isolate as much as those Brainwaves ones, and they do feel a lot more comfortable than the stock pads, but I did find that they got a little bit too warm, and I didn't love what they did to the sound signature, which I will talk about the sound on the Sony's in a little bit. They're quite spacious and they feel quite open, but these velour pads just kind of muffled everything a little bit too much. It kind of took away like the special sound of the Sony's. So basically I have to stick with the stock ear pads on the Sony's, which I really don't love, but I do think I can get used to it, and it's not like a completely cramped experience, but it does feel a little bit just too small. Just not wide enough and not enough space in there, but your mileage may vary and it depends on your ear size. As for the rest of the build quality, I think these two are pretty much on par. I feel like the Sony uses kind of better materials, slightly more quality. It feels a little bit more industrial. The Sennheiser's using plastic here on the yoke. This is actually the third time I've tried the HD490 Pros. I've tried them twice before, and both of those times I was getting a lot of creaking from, I don't know if it was this piece here or the yoke itself. Every time I would put them on or just move a little bit like this, I would get this annoying creaking noise, which I saw some other people on Reddit experience as well. But this unit that I got does not have that, and it feels better built than the other HD490 Pros that I've tried. But the Sony's do feel slightly more, I wouldn't say durable necessarily, but they feel slightly better built. But it's very close. It's a toss-up, and I don't think that should be a factor in your purchase decision. I do like the headband more on the HD490 Pro. I just feel like it's more comfortable overall. The headphone is just more comfortable overall, thanks to these pads, thanks to this headband up here. But the Sony's really are not far behind. They're even more lightweight than the Sennheisers, and you do kind of feel them melting away on your head a little bit more than the Sennheisers, but you're not getting the same type of overall comfort because of the pads and because of the headband. But I think most people are going to find both of these extremely comfortable, and they are two of the most comfortable headphones. I just think the HD490 Pro edges it by a smidge. Speaking of edging by a smidge, where the Sony does that over the Sennheiser is the sound quality. In my opinion, it kind of just sounds better for everything, for music, for gaming, practically every genre, sounds slightly better on the Sony. And you kind of have to take this with a grain of salt because I'm going back and forth with these two, which is not something that a normal human being does. Like, my wife sometimes looks at me and she's like, what is wrong with you? And I get it. Like, this is not normal behavior. But if you're really into technology, you're really into electronics, you're really into music, headphones, you just want to compare stuff. You want to see what's better than the other. Where can I squeeze out a little bit more performance for the price? And given that these two are practically the same price at this point in time, this was genuinely like the hardest comparison that I've done so far. And I've done quite a few headphones comparisons, 1-to-1 or even between 3 different headphones. And this one was just so difficult because the general sound signature is honestly kind of similar. Like, it's not that much of a difference, where both of these are surprisingly bassy for being open backs. The MDR-MV1 has a little bit more bass than the HC490 Pro, and the bass presentation is a little bit different, where the HC490 Pro can get a little bit muddy, maybe a little bit boomy with the bass, and the MDR-MV1 just kind of punches, but it punches and then moves on to where I don't find it bleeding into the mid-range in any way. And it just lends itself really well to bass heavy genres, particularly hip hop. I mean, these are awesome. These are awesome. But so are the HD490 Pros. Like, I can't even lie. If you were to try either of these, I think you're going to be very, very happy with either of them, especially if you listen to bass heavy music. For vocal centric music, I think that's where the Sony kind of is a step above, because I feel like vocals are just cleaner overall. Overall, the presentation is just clearer and cleaner on the Sonys than it is on the HD490 Pro, to where vocals can take a little bit of a step back with these when you're using these producing pads. The mixing pads are different, but I just prefer the producing pads, and I think a lot of people do as well. So my thoughts are with those on. And I just feel like vocals, they don't necessarily struggle on this headphone, but I do find that the vocals are lacking just a little bit of clarity, and they feel like a notch below in terms of like fidelity, in comparison to the Sony, where it's honestly really impressive, the vocals on the Sonys, which is surprising because if you read the frequency response graph, you would assume it's just like a boomy, bassy mess, but it's really not like that at all. The mid-range is super natural, really natural. I feel like vocals are more natural on the Sony than they are on the HD490 Pro. And overall, I just find it to be a better sound signature for practically every genre. But we're almost splitting hairs. Like, this is a maybe 5%, 10% difference in terms of performance for sound on part of the Sony in comparison to the HD490 Pro. Overall, I just find the Sony to be a little bit more spacious than the HD490 Pro. I wouldn't necessarily say they stage wider, but I can kind of feel or hear more space in between specific instruments on the Sony, to where at times instruments can feel a little bit jumbled on the HD490 Pro, and it doesn't happen on the Sony. And that lends itself really well to gaming as well, which I'll touch on a little bit. I really like both of these for both single player story games and FPS games. The imaging is awesome on both of these. I feel like the imaging is slightly better on the Sony, and if you're playing FPS games, I think you might be like kind of shocked at how easy it is to pick up footsteps on the Sonys, but the HD490 Pro is not far behind, and it's an awesome performer in both FPS games and immersive games. Playing something like Elden Ring, I feel like the music kind of envelops you more on the Sony, and the combat sound effects have a little bit more punch and clarity on the Sony, but the HD490 Pro is holding its own. It's an awesome sounding headphone, especially for immersive games, and you can even go to the mixing pads if you wanted to play FPS games and get a little bit better of an imaging performance in terms of footsteps, just because you won't be getting as much bass emphasis and you can kind of pick the footsteps out a little bit more. But I just find the producing pads more comfortable, and I think they're better for a wide range of games. Again, it's just really close, and it's just so hard to pick between one or the other, but to my ears, the Sony just sounds a little bit better for music and for gaming. Something I want to touch on real quick is the Sony's frequency response graphs, which it kept me from actually checking these out a while ago, because I saw reviews, I saw the frequency response graphs, and basically it seemed like they were just treble murders. Like, the treble looked out of control. It looked like way too much. And I'm personally pretty sensitive to sibilance, so that had me kind of disqualifying the Sony completely. But then I started reading and hearing that treble emphasis, it doesn't necessarily translate to music listening for a lot of people. And I guess I'm one of those people because I really just don't find the Sony's sibilant at all. Like, sure, they're bright, but because you have that extended bass and a good amount of emphasis in the low end, plus really natural mids, I just almost never found them sibilant. And actually, I found the HD490 Pros to be a little bit more sibilant than the Sony's. And I don't know if that's because the HD490 Pro has a little bit more of a peaky treble, and the Sony is kind of just more uniform in the areas where it is a little bit emphasized in the treble. But to my ears, I just didn't find that treble peak to be annoying at all. And I actually found the HD490 Pros to be slightly more sibilant than the Sony. I didn't touch on drivability, so I'll do that before giving my closing thoughts. The Sonys are insanely easy to drive. One of the easiest headphones I've tried to drive. They're kind of like IEMs in terms of how sensitive they are. You could use a little mini dongle DAC and get plenty of power from these. You definitely don't need an amp, but they do well if you pair it up with a DAC amp like the Fozzy Audio K7 that I have with me. I use that for both music and PS5 gaming, and the Sonys didn't miss a beat, and they sound really good on that as well, but they also sound just as good running off a dongle DAC or even an M2 Pro MacBook Pro that I have. The HD490 Pros are a little bit harder to drive, but it's not that crazy. Like, I could listen at about 70% on my M2 Pro MacBook Pro. If I'm using a small dongle DAC, I might have to get closer to 80, maybe 85% volume, but it gets the job done and it's really not too hard to drive, and they pair really well with amps as well. So my closing thoughts are basically what I mentioned at the beginning. Just buy the one that is cheaper at the moment because I find them to be so close. I do think the Sony sound a little bit clearer, a little bit cleaner, and I personally prefer the sound signature slightly more than the HD490 Pro, but I think the Sennheiser still sound very good, and I think most people will like either of these. But if you're overly sensitive to treble, maybe the Sonys might be too much. I didn't find the treble peak to even be present on my ears, but it could vary from person to person. On the other hand, I find the Sennheiser HD490 Pro to be a more comfortable headphone overall due to these pads, but I still find the Sonys to be very comfortable. And if you could find slightly bigger pads that work well for you and don't change the sound signature too much, they could be awesome. So basically, both of these headphones are awesome. I love both of them. Deciding between these two has been almost impossible, and I realize that that doesn't help anyone who's trying to make the decision between either of these. But I would just say, like I said a couple of times before, just get the cheaper one. You might be able to find a good deal on eBay. I found a good deal on the Sonys on eBay where I was able to get them for $300 with tax included from an authorized retailer, Sony authorized retailer actually. So yeah, look for some deals. See if you can find the Sony on sale for cheaper than the HD490 Pro. I would say if comfort is your most important decider, get the HD490 Pro. If you want slightly better sound quality with still great lightweight comfort, go for the Sonys. But I think whichever one you get of these two, you're going to be happy. That'll do it for this video. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think if you've tried either of these two headphones, and let me know what you want me to try in the future. See you guys in the next one.